Hey everyone, how's life treating me? I want to apologize for my muffled voice. I have a cold. It's the second time this is happening to me since I started my YouTube channel. It's that time of the year, but I really wanted to review Birth of a Nation, so here we go, let's go. The Birth of a Nation is a period drama film based on a true story, set in Southampton County, Virginia in the early part of the 19th century, and is the story about Nat Turner, who was a slave who was fortunate enough to learn to read and write at a young age, and ultimately ended up preaching the Bible to his fellow slaves. His financially strained owner accepts offers from other much less friendly slave owners to use Nat's skills in order to give sermons to other slaves in order to keep their spirits high and to make them more obedient. By going with his owner to preach on other plantations, Turner witnesses many atrocities, slaves being treated extremely cruelly, and eventually decides to start an uprising. When it comes to films that take place in the 19th century United States, especially if they have anything to do with the Civil War and or slavery, which they usually do, I'm usually on board. I'm very interested in the time period, and I think there are some very interesting stories to tell about very brave heroes, but also monstrous villains, and I actually prefer them to the westerns because I think they are way more realistic than this very romanticized world that's presented in us usually in the western. The uprising or the rebellion itself doesn't really happen in this film until like the third act. It's basically the last 20 to 30 minutes, and that's actually a good thing because that's the part of the movie that's actually the most unimpressive thing this film has to offer. We basically spend like the first 90 minutes seeing Nat, this very charismatic and strong character, eventually being broken down, his spirit being broken down. And like I said, that's a good thing, especially in retrospect, because knowing how disappointing the conclusion of this film is, it actually helps the film that it spends more time on showing us the events that are leading up to Nat wanting to make this decision to start this uprising, instead of spending a lot of time actually showing what the outcome of that decision was. The most effective scenes by far are the ones in which Nat and his owner are visiting these plantations and they are witnessing firsthand just the fucking brutality, the savagery in which some of these slaves are being treated. And despite this, Nat still manages to give his sermons, to keep his composure somewhat, to play his cool and to do his job, despite the fact that he is being torn to shreds emotionally, as you would expect him to be. The cool thing about it is that his owner is also somewhat emotionally distressed because of this, albeit to a much lesser extent, but still. What's not so cool about it is that the film doesn't really seem interested in exploring this much further, and that's kind of a shame because think about it, the setup is very interesting. You have this black slave, a slave still, but undoubtedly much more privileged than other slaves, and his somewhat friendly and understanding and empathetic owner, who is also somewhat emotionally distressed because of all the brutality and all the savagery and the inhumanity he sees other slaves being treated with, but who unfortunately still has his hands tied, he still has to obey his own superiors, and who doesn't really have any way to help or to make the situation any better for anyone. I kind of wish this was developed a little bit more. I kind of wish this relationship was explored a little bit more, maybe have a little bit of back and forth between these two characters, maybe actually have them be friends, which was actually what I was expecting it was going to be. It was actually what it appeared like in the beginning of the film, that these two are sort of friends, but they are not. They are really not. Armie Hammer is a very decent actor, but his character in this film pretty much could have been played by anybody. He is incredibly one-note. The only thing we see him do to try and cope with all of this shit going on around him is just occasionally go sit next to a tree and drink by himself. He is an alcoholic, and at the end of the day, he is still basically just an unforgiving and disillusioned slave owner like all of the rest. Very uncharacter-like to what we thought his character was going to be in the beginning of the film. Now, you can probably make the argument that it wasn't like that in real life, and therefore it isn't like that in the movie. These two weren't friends in reality, and they are not friends in the film. But hey, movies based on true stories are all fictionalized more or less. But they didn't decide to include this, whatever. But an element of fiction they did decide to include is so incredibly mishandled that it is actually completely unforgivable, in my opinion. I really wanted to avoid mentioning this piece of trivia right here, but seeing as it is such an integral part of this film's DNA by now, and such an integral part of the point I want to make next, I really can't see how I can avoid it. The thing is that director, writer, and main actor of this film and co-writer of the script, these two guys, were accused of committing sexual assault on a woman back in 1999 while they were students. And ultimately both of them were acquitted, but the victim unfortunately committed suicide in 2012, and this controversy really cast a very dark shadow over the film, and it's still affecting the film in a very negative way as we speak, as the time I'm recording this review. 20th Century Fox decided to cancel the 2017 release of the film in many countries due to the poor box office release of the film in the United States. Now, this is incredibly unfortunate. I really don't think any film deserves this, and of course, obviously, I have no idea if this rape actually happened. No one does, only the parties involved. But just the fact that director, writer, and the main actor, Nate Parker, decided to include in his film not one, but two rapes. Now, they are not exactly scenes because they happen off screen, but still, there's just something about that feels incredibly wrong. Basically, mostly for the fact that one of the women who gets raped is actually Ned's spouse, and this is the event that pushes him over the edge, that makes him want to decide to start this rebellion and just fucking kill the shit out of every single white slave owner in sight. And this didn't happen. This rape didn't happen. This is not what made the actual Ned in real life decide to start an uprising. No, it's fiction. And just it's something about it that feels incredibly sinister. And the other rape as well. Both of these women, like, they get raped, but we are shown how this affects more the men emotionally, actually, rather than the women. The women are actually more like plot devices in the film. And I don't know, there's just something about that that really left a bad taste in my mouth. And it felt really unnecessary for me, also because I wish the film would have explored a little bit the religious aspects of the story. Because we actually do get to see slave owners using verses from the Bible as a sort of justification for their very barbaric acts, and Ned himself starts using verses from the Bible too as a sort of counter-argument, as a way to fight fire with fire, as a justification for his very own barbaric acts, and I really wish the film would have commented on this a little bit, maybe explore it a little bit more, like how Christianity can be used for both good and evil, how it can be used to explain away all sorts of violence like it has been done during the course of history, but the film really doesn't seem interested in this. It's basically brought up in a single scene, I think it's a single line of dialogue, and that's it. Like I said before, the very last act of the film is a pretty lousy one. It's probably one of the most underwhelming conclusions to a film I have seen from 2016, and that's actually saying something because I have seen a lot of shitty films with a lot of shitty third acts from 2016. It goes completely cliche mode. I mean, we have the main antagonist in the film who is this very nasty slave catcher. He is actually the one responsible for Ned's father fleeing from the plantation they were on when he was still a child, so he had to grow up fatherless, and he is the one actually who rapes his wife. So it's very personal between them, and you know, when the last act happens and the black people are fighting white people, you know what's going to happen, you know what's going to come when these two are going to get face to face and duke it out, and you just can't wait for that moment because you know it's that moment, like they are finally, Ned is going to exact his revenge, he's going to kill that son of a bitch, and it happens, and it's just filmed and edited in such an uninteresting and bland way that it completely, oh my god, it's so worthless. There's no emotion, there's just no, oh my god, it completely undermined everything, and oh my god, I just didn't like it. Boy, man, I mean, this film, I really wish this was better than I think it is, at least. I think there's some good stuff in it. I think most of the performances are pretty alright, but that's mostly it. And I'm actually quite surprised to see where this is standing now on the tomato meter. I actually think it should be more like on the 60 or 50% mark even. I think it's actually quite overrated. And I'm really sorry about all the controversy behind it, but I just don't think it's that good of a film, to be all that honest with you. Just my opinion. Thanks for watching my review, folks. As always, if you enjoyed this review, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so I can see you later with other reviews. Until then, take care, folks. Stay awesome. Goodbye.